We almost did it, guys. We almost turfed out that racist mayor what loves gaslighting his constituents and also raising the symbol of communists over the capital city in fireworks displays costing 1.5 million of taxpayers' money. Well, kind of. Because seems we were gaslighted at the last minute into believing that Londoners might just be a little bit sick of insane motor fines and sword-wielding psycho imports stabbing up little kiddies in broad daylight, and might actually be on the verge of waking up and booting him out. Especially when the poll showed at 9 AM on voting day that chief competitor Susan Hall had tightened the gap by just 10 percentage points for the Tory challenge. But alas, turns out it was all just a cruel tease, and Labour's Sadiq Khan eventually secured just over 1 million votes to be re-elected London Mayor, and by a decent majority of some 275,000 over his Conservative rival, who earned just under 800,000 votes. So I guess it's 4 more years of being subject to grievance politics, race baiting and virtue signalling, not looking back in anger at the trail of kiddie corpses and imported drug gangs, and of course, generally just being priced off the roads. Fuck you! But one far-right racist bigot vanillary woman went viral on social media shortly after the results were announced, and articulated what a lot of us were feeling after the polls mugged us off again. So here's what she's got to say.
Hello. I'm finding the whole London Mayor thing very depressing as well. Like, how does someone keep getting voted back in who it just hates Britain, hates everything British, has destroyed London, like it's turning into an utter cesspit, and tourism is falling through the floor, and there's got violence every day and murders every day and knife crime and the ULEZ and now the potential paper mile. Like, how is anybody voting for Sadiq Khan?
Right, well, I'll stop you there, love, because it ain't rocket science, Gil. London is full of journeyman imports with no ties or loyalties to the city they're hosted in. And the constricting communities forced to live together also bring with them imported cultural conflicts and general historical blood feuds that are generational in nature, and which often spill out onto the streets of a city that has traditionally had nothing to do with any of it. Yep, London is now a limp spectator to endless blood wars, callous pickpockets, Albanian drug traffickers, and endless Turkish barbers for some reason. And even the non-violent cultural enrichment seems to only offer liberal nomads without connection or allegiance. International students taught to hate the country they're in, and middle-class coffee floggers who cry when they're misgendered.
You're rude! Absolutely not! Don't ever call me transphobic, ever! You do not know me!
You're being transphobic, Karen. Now get out!
Do not call me transphobic!
You are transphobic. Now get out!
I want a refund!
You're not having one, do it.
The Cockneys were an iconic mainstay of London and English culture for over 500 years. And were all but gone from the East End in just under 20 years of Tony Blair's destructive open border and infinity immigrants policy. And we tend to still call the current occupants of London Londoners, but the truth is that they're mostly foreign-born visitors whose first language is not even the English tongue. So, to sum up this lady's question, people keep voting the same anti-English foreigner back into office because Sadiq has a voter base that's entirely anti-English, and who have no long-term ties or interest in seeing a capital return to its cultural lineage. Anyway, let's carry on.
Muslim councillor being voted in, and he's there waving his Palestinian flag and pointing to Allah and shouting out slogans about Allah. It's just, there's nothing British about that. Nothing. Not 1%. And I've said this for many years and people laughed at me, just going, it'll never happen in Britain. Like we're something special. We're not. We're just another geographical landmass where if you get the numbers high enough, it'll change. And then once they're too high, there's nothing you can do about it.
Okay, so I've also had dopes on the twit-twat say it's totally not happening and it'll never happen here in England as well. Now, presuming they're not phony fakey bot fellas, and in many cases they probably are, because no human can possibly be that thick and cringe, or at least whose name ain't Katie Price, you'd have to be blind not to see the increase in Islamification of Britain happening not just in London but all over the country. I mean, Lawrence Fox drew some heat for posting this a few days ago, because this was from a viral post from about 7 years ago. But generally, the national statistics bear out what we see with our own eyes, and even possibly underrepresent it. Traditionally English cities like Birmingham and Newham are increasingly becoming unrecognisable, with white English populations receding and brown Muslim demographics growing. Birmingham, for example, saw a near 10% rise over the decade with people identifying as Muslim, whilst the city saw a 12% decrease in Christians. Worryingly, some schools are now teaching classes where most kids' first language is not even the nation's mother tongue, and some don't even speak it at all, whilst demographics are so subverted up there that you can even play a quick game of Spot Whitey. And as she says in the vid, we recently just saw the Green Party win local elections in the city of Leeds, and the first thing the newly elected local council representative of Leeds did was scream Allahu Akbar at the top of his lungs, while some plonker raised a foreign flag behind him screaming Free Palestine.
3 years ago we started this campaign. I started alone, and Allah sent his angels to come and assist me. So for the community of Hales and Gibson who are fed up of being let down by the Labour Council, who have been fed up of being taken for granted, who have been fed up of being taken for granted, who have been fed up of being neglected by this rotten council, who are fed up. Look at the language you're using, back off. Don't use that as a win for the people of Hales and Gibson. It's a win for the people of Gaza who have been We will not be silent. We will raise the voice of Gaza. We will raise the voice of Palestine. Allahu Akbar.
Well, I'm sure the local voters of Leeds are ecstatic that they selected a foreign activist to speak up on a conflict across the other side of the world that no fucker can point to on a map, and just jumping for joy about how the newly installed local representative is prioritising their local interests of fixing up potholes, balancing the council budget and, checks notes, freeing the Holy Land of bloodthirsty occupiers. Some shit. Not once in his victory speech did he mention English interests, did he mention the local concerns of the peoples of Leeds, and instead just promised to raise the voice of Gaza and Palestine. And all whilst what looks like a petrified white English soy boy claps in the background like some sort of pet gimpy slave. Which seems to me like a perfect display of how most leftists and even the government seem to work these days. And ultimately, if population trends continue in the way of Leeds, Birmingham and Newham, how is the whole of England going to end up at any other destination than the current situations of those cities now? I mean, these people already feel so emboldened that they can go on Twitter to tell our people to leave their own cities if we can't tolerate the Islamification of our own culture and halal meats forced into our own fast food shops where no fucker ever voted for. Make no mistake, he wants us to move out so we can just abandon the territory. And as the imports show no sign of stopping, running away to other cities will just lead to more traditional towns and cities being colonised and rendered unrecognisable. And I feel that such recognition is what this lady's really articulating in the video.
And so few are willing to turn their cheek to see the reality of what is happening to this little island that was once so proud of its culture and history and respected for education and military and law.
Whoa, slow your horses. You can't be proud, love, because that's white supremacy. And I keep hearing that we need to be constantly ashamed of our culture, heritage and historical legacies. And also, shame on you for noticing said change in demographic scale. I mean, sure, we once had a monocultural society where everyone was united in the common tongue and shared values of a communal heritage. But as my pink-haired eco-socialist gender studies professor told me last week, that was nothing but an oppressive patriarchal society enforced by white supremes. And worse, there was zero cultural enrichment in those days, and it was left to the Caucasian blokes to stab up women in dark alleys and cheekily nick wallets out of passing tourists. So thank God for the current day multiculturalism that can take the burden off the white man and totally fill those jobs today.
How we're just becoming a mass of confused, divided, quite violent crap.
And some would say that that's likely by intent, given it's going on all across the wealthy Western nations in the same suspiciously coordinated manner, and like it was secretly designed this way in backroom schemes that locked off places like Bilderberg and Davos to demoralise, destabilise and collapse the strongest nations in the West, in order to build back better with a neo-feudalist dream of a cashless society and enabling a digital prison. But that's just batshit insane far-right 4chan conspiracy theory, bro. And we ain't really allowed to talk about that on the YouTubes, so shushy shushy.
just the scales are very much tipping in the wrong direction. And I'm not sure what future there is for Brits.
You know, people like Elon Musk ask why we're not having babies anymore. Well, growing number of incels aside, if this is to be our future, why would we want to bring children into it when we see nothing but civil strife and cultural conflict as inevitable in the next decade? To a lot of people, it just doesn't make sense to produce dependents when one can feel war marching over the horizon. She then goes on to say that Islam says it's there to take over and be a ruling force, which seems pretty obvious to me. And of course, Islam is not like Christianity or even Hinduism. And unlike these other religions, on the whole, it just cannot seem to integrate with Western values, when Western values are so antithesis to its own core commandments. And worse, it's totally relentless and dogmatic in its thirst to dominate and spread its beliefs to as many people as possible. Which is why it's pretty alarming to see the recent trend of dopey socialist students converting to Islam on college campuses all across America. Now clearly these are quite performative, because I doubt so many leftist LGBT peeps are going to want to remain for long in a religion that likes to introduce their kind to rooftops and forbids them from dyeing their hair luminous colours every 3 days. And all I can say is, I'm going to be very interested to see how they react to what these people do to apostates when they eventually grow bored of the current thing and try to leave.
And meanwhile, people in the West and those of Christian culture just keep lambasting themselves and whipping themselves, silencing ourselves and cancelling ourselves. And we're doing the work for them. Hating our own culture, hating our own history, appeasing everything, apologising for everything. And you'd never ever get that in a Muslim society.
Yeah, know what you'd also never get in a Muslim country, love? A giant fuck-off bacon cheeseburger. Itchy. I mean, white leaders moaning about how everything and everyone in their represented governments are brown and totally racist against Christian Caucasian fellas. No, you never get that because those are serious countries doing pretty serious things. They take their culture and history pretty seriously, which means that they're actively fortifying their future. So what is the future of England? But the cucked guy cowering behind his Muslim leader and no bacon.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Whereas there's been a huge psychological operation on Christian cultures, Christianity, Western cultures. And the sad thing is that we as the Christian Westernized cultures ourselves have done most of the work in killing ourselves off.
Yeah, can't say she's wrong on that either, really. Although schools have been promoting the denigration of the British Empire and loathing of our historical legacy for years, in the past decade, we've really ramped up the self-hating and self-flagellating, which can mostly be seen in our media, as primetime shows and channels continually platform race-baiting grifter haters like Dr. Shola and Arinder Kaur, while simultaneously refusing to balance out the barrage of toxic leftism with anyone remotely on the right, like Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins or Carl Benjamin. And even John Cleese seems to be considered too bigoted to be platformed on mainstream shows these days. Well, other than the blatantly controlled opposition GB News. And mainly for the crime of noticing government census data and omitting the sights of his own friggin' eyes. And once you're at a point where the Archbishop of your nation's primary religious institution is now openly promoting hedonism, blasphemy and outright sin, I'm not sure there's any way back, really. Nor is it longer appropriate to call yourselves a Christian country, if not even the head of the church can bring himself to promote the ideals of his own faith, and would happily instead endorse a foreign religious festival, despite claiming to believe that there's only one true God and anyone who believes in any others are committing grave sins and destined for hell. I mean, how many churches are there in Saudi Arabia? How many Muslim leaders would wish Christians a happy Easter in Islamic countries? And I'm not really sure why I'm surprised that this Welby fella seems to be a bit of a wrong'un, given he thought Post Office witch Paula Bennells was of enough upstanding moral character to be a London bishop. Oh, I don't know. In the UK at least, it just seems like it's now not trendy to be Christian or to believe in something greater than ourselves or our own ego, so most people don't. A generational spate of cultural arrogance and narcissism has them believing they only answer to themselves, which I'm sure will come as quite a shock when the caliphate comes to their doorstep within the next decade or two.
I really had some hope that Khan would be kicked out. But it's only going to get worse in terms of the demographics and the percentages of those who see themselves in Khan versus those who don't. So, not feeling very hopeful today.
So she ends it by saying that she really had hoped that Khan was going to get booted out. Well, so were we all. But I guess that we all just underestimated the power of his imported voter base and the general vitriol the citizens of the capital city have toward the country they're occupying. And you just can't help but feel for the poor girl. As despondency, demoralisation and despair fills the gaping void in her eyes, she quietly concedes it's only going to get worse. Well, it is if we don't find a way to remoralise the West. Booting out Khan would have given a big boon to all those who have lost hope for London ever returning to the people of its birthright. And whilst yes, demographics is destiny, I think there is still time to reverse course. Stopping the boats and deporting criminals will be a basic start, but we just need to get people into office who are actually serious politicians and who are not cowed by lobbying groups and any kind of liberal pressure. And whilst old Dickie Tice has made it abundantly clear in recent weeks that he totally ain't the guy for the job, maybe we'll all get a based populace to turn things around sooner rather than later. And preferably before any kind of unwanted civil war comes to the shores of merry old Blighty.